Calvary kids. I hope you all are doing well, and I have something really exciting to tell you. Today is our last day where we're studying the Old Testament, and then next week we're actually going to be looking at the New Testament. So before we get to today's story though, let's review what we talked about last week. Remember, Ezra read the law before all of the people, and the Levites helped the people understood what God's word said. And then once the people understood what God's word said, they realized that they haven't been obeying God's word like they should, and that caused them to cry. But Ezra told them that they shouldn't cry, but that they should rejoice, because now that they understood God's word, they could better follow and obey him. Well, today we're going to look at Malachi. And as you can imagine, since today is the last day that we are looking at the Old Testament, today we're going to be looking at the last book of the Old Testament, which is Malachi. So pause and as a family, turn to the book of Malachi. So the people of God were back home. They had a new wall, they had a new temple, but things were still really hard. Life was still really difficult. And people were kind of upset that things weren't like they always used to be. Things didn't just go back to normal even though they were back from exile. And because things were still difficult, they began to question whether or not God really loved them. And because they started to question God's love, they started to become a little bit lazy in how they worshiped God. God had a warning for one group of people in particular. So pause and as a family, see if you can figure out what group God had a warning for and what is it they were doing wrong. And to find the answer to this, check Malachi 1, 6 through 8. The priests weren't offering correct sacrifices to God. They were offering animals that had something wrong with them, that couldn't walk. These animals wouldn't have been able to be sold, and so people thought, well, if I can't sell them, I'll just offer them to God, since whatever I offer to God just gets burned up anyway. Well, we know that's not really the right attitude to have when we worship God. We should bring the best of the best when we worship God, and the priests weren't. They were bringing kind of the worst of the worst. And not only that, but God told the priests that instead of pointing people to him, instead of pointing people to God, the priests were leading the people away from God. And God warned the priests that they needed to stop doing that or they were going to face some judgment. God also told the people about he was going to send a messenger, and this messenger was going to prepare the way for the Messiah, the chosen one who was going to save the people of Israel. And of course, we know who that is, but back then, they didn't know who that was or how long it was going to be until the Messiah came and until that messenger came. But God told them in advance that he was coming. Now, God also addressed the people in general. So we're going to see what God said to the people. So as a family, pause and check and see what is it that God told the people they were doing wrong. Some people were not bringing the right amount of offering money to the priests like they were supposed to the temple like they were supposed to. And they agreed they were keeping back some of the money that they were supposed to be giving to God. And part of this too was that people said that it was useless to follow God because it was hard. It was difficult to obey God, and they saw people who weren't obeying God living successful lives. So they said, well, if those people over there are living successful lives and disobeying God, then why are we obeying God? And we know that's not the right way to think about things, but that's the way that people were thinking. So pause as a family and see what it is that God promises to those who are faithful to him. And to find the answer to that, check Malachi 3:16. God promises that when he's bringing judgment on people who are disobedient to him and turn away from him, that he will protect those who are faithful to him. In fact, they will be his treasured possession. So what does this have to do with us? Well, because of what Jesus did for us, we can have a right relationship with God. When we decide to turn away from living the life we want to live and decide to follow God instead, we become God's treasured possession. Now we're not saved by our obedience, now we're saved by God's grace. But we should still try to be obedient to what God commands us to do, because that helps us live lives that point other people to Jesus and give glory to God. So pause for a second, and as a family, talk about commands of the Bible, commands of God, that are hard to obey. Sometimes following God can be hard, and sometimes obeying His commandments can be hard. But because of what Jesus did for us on the cross, whenever we do mess up, God is faithful to forgive us when we turn back to Him after we sin. So this is my challenge for you all this week. Whenever you fail, whenever you mess up in following God, as you know, we all will because we're human, I challenge you to turn to God and ask for forgiveness as quickly as possible, and ask forgiveness for those who may also have been affected by your mess up or your sin. So until next week, Calvary, when we start talking about the New Testament, have a great week. See ya!